bright star. Oh, Melakilikimaka is a thing to say on a bright Hawaiian Christmas day. And that's the island greeting that we send to you from the land where palm trees sway. Here we know that Christmas will be green and bright. The sun will shine by day and all the stars at night. Oh, Melakilikimaka is a wise way to say Merry Christmas, to say Merry Christmas, to say Merry Christmas, to you. So we heard from Melakilikimaka with words and music by R. Alex Anderson, and Dance with the Bells by Shelley Fairplay, a friend of mine. And next we will hear from Vince Guaraldi and Linus and Lucy. Change some livers. I'm playing a Prelude Liver 40 harp by Lyon and Healy. So I have to change the livers for the notes that I want with my hands. On a pedal harp, I would be using my feet. Let's see. That was Linus and Lucy by Vince Guaraldi. And next we have Red-Nosed Reindeer by Johnny Marks. And then I'm going to take a quick break into a kind of a more spiritual section. We're going to begin with a song called Through the Eyes of Love, the theme song from the movie The Ice Castles. I'm going to change the levers again. C sharp. Okay, so here's Ice Castles. Oh, and then this is music by Marvin Hamlish. ice castles. And then I'm going to move into a Celtic Christmas section with Away in a Manger by William James Kirkpatrick and a book by Kim Robertson. And then I have another beautiful arrangement of Hark the Herald Angels Sing, music by Felix Mendelssohn. And this arrangement, I found is a wonderful arrangement by Philip Wesley.
2-minute warning, Kim.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's the end of my program. Thank you so much.
Are you sure? Thank you. It's been lovely. We've really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you. I can do a little bit of Kathleen if you'd like. Let's see.
If you want to just fill in the last couple minutes, that would be a nice way to end.
Still have G sharp.
That was lovely. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, Feliz Kalikimaka. Merry Christmas. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, that's a great way to introduce our program. It isn't often we get harps intersecting with astronomy. I think it's a great combination.
I did too. Thank you so much for having me. And it's been a pleasure.
Great. Well, hopefully we'll be seeing you many, many more times.
I hope so.
And now I think it's time for us to begin our December meeting. Welcome, everybody. This is the December meeting of Orange County Astronomers. I'm Barbara Toy. I'm the current president, and delighted to have you all here. I know there are a whole lot of things going on at this time of year, and we have a very excellent program as usual, and I'm glad that those of you who are joining us are able to enjoy it with us. And I should say, before I turn it over to the announcement crew, you may have gotten emails about elections. This is our election season. Please do vote, even though we don't have a whole lot of controversy about who's on the panel. It's always good to know that people are keeping an eye on us. Anyway, with that, I will turn it over to Kyle and company, and Merry Christmas, everybody. Or happy holidays. There's more than one holiday going on at this time of year.
Great, thank you. I'll start here. All right, here we go. So Cecilia, do you want to start tonight? Are they?
Hello everybody, happy holidays and welcome new members. We hope you enjoy this amazing meeting. Okay, guys, so sad part is because the whole outburst is still on hold until further notice. We do have some beginners classes online, those of you that want to learn how to use your new fancy telescopes. And the next board meeting is also next year on the 23rd online. And if you want to know more info, go ahead and check the calendar for more information.
All right, so Barbara spoke briefly about the elections that are upcoming. The election day is January 14th, so all ballots must be in by then. There will be a paper ballot in the December edition of the Serious Astronomer. Additionally, everyone should have received electronic voting instructions via email. if you have not received one yet, please contact John Hu to get your email updated. You should have gotten those early this week. That's at least when I received mine on Monday. And here are the candidates just once again. And write-in option is available on the ballot as well.
Alrighty, so we hit the ground running. We had like up to 3 events per week in August, September, October, November timeframe. We're taking a little break for the holidays because some schools are getting out and doing some testing. Thank you all for going out there for the outreach. You made a great impact, especially because I haven't been out in a while. The next thing, 3 things. If you're interested in becoming an outreach participant, please go ahead and send out an email to outreach@ocastronomers.org. If you have not been receiving the emails, but you want to be part of it, maybe check and update the info. Maybe we'll update it for us. Lastly, if you are no longer in the area and can't attend the meetings anymore, or your telescope is broken and would like to stop getting the emails, same thing, please email me to update the new mailing list for the next 2022. Thanks, guys.
Hello, my name is Galileo, and today's gonna be a waxing quizzing. Hope you guys see the beautiful one today.
All right, so this is just a sample list of the telescopes available for purchase through the Adopt a Scope program. The next pickup date is the 11th, which I believe is tomorrow. So please contact John Hu if you would like to pick up a scope and purchase one. Again, if anyone has things that they would like to put in the Serious Astronomer newsletter, please contact Dave Fisher and he will review those items. And another note on the Serious Astronomer, once again, everyone is continuing to receive their paper newsletter. If you would like to stop receiving a paper copy and just be able to access it online, please email Charlie. Everyone also has access to the online newsletter. It should be available on the website when you log in. We're looking at starting some star parties in the early part of 2022, so there will be more information on that. But just remember that the club is not responsible for your safety if you go out to the ANZA site in regards to COVID-19. If you go out there, you're doing so at your own risk, because the club does not have the capacity to maintain a sanitized environment. Please remember to keep weeds clear. If you have a pad or an observatory area or otherwise responsible for some area of the site, please make sure to do that. And then as well, if you could help at any of the communal sites such as the Anza House, football field, and the Kuhn Observatory, that would be very much appreciated. And the next general meeting is January 14th. Now I'll turn it over to the What's Up crew. Thank you. Should be John Garrett.
Thanks for inviting me to do the What's Up. I enjoy these, enjoy doing these What's Up programs. I'm going to try to do as many as I can next year, looking at the schedule going forward. Anyway, all of my references come from some very common sources, Astronomy Magazine, and I like to use the skylive.com website to track down locations of comets. And everything else is from my own observations and my own photographs, some that I've taken recently and some that I rely on that I've taken some time ago. And so the first thing we're looking at here is, you're probably wondering what these 3 gems are. And they are my 9x50 finder scope, my 76 millimeter refractor, and my Schmidt-Cassegrain with a dew shield. And so this is what I do most of my photographing with. And this particular viewpoint is my balcony where I get a little astronomy in. And if I move the camera in front of the telescope, I can show you what was in the night sky just a few days ago. And there's Venus, Saturn, and Jupiter. And so all of these planets will be visible throughout the next month. And there's also another one farther up that I'm guessing in this picture is about there up in the far left corner, and that would be Neptune. So we have quite a nice planet parade going on. And the planet Venus, you can expect some dramatic changes in its appearance over the next month. Here's a photo I took about Monday night. I think it was Monday night. And we've got Venus right above the moon. And Venus is essentially rounding the bend. It's coming around the edge, and we're going to, its orbit, and we're going to see Venus come toward us and get noticeably larger and a little more crescent shaped over the next month. And these pictures I took with my Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope at prime focus, and shows the Venus about 10 days apart, and you can see it changing size, and you can see it slightly changing shape in its crescent shape, getting more crescent-like as the time goes on. And so it's just going to continue to grow in size if you're watching through a telescope. And I have to admit, Venus, the sight of Venus at its absolute most crescent phase is one of the great memories I have as a childhood. I picked up my dad's binoculars, looked at Venus where he was pointing it out to me, and I saw a crescent. And it was many, many years later where the timing was right that I would see a crescent moon of Venus through a pair of binoculars. And so by all means, start watching now to see that. Using my photo from the other night, the moon has by now moved out of the picture. It's over there past Jupiter, and it's in a half moon phase at the moment, which brings up the phases of the month. First quarter is essentially tonight. Full moon will be the 18th. The third quarter moon will be the 26th, and then the new moon on the 4th of January. So after this weekend, it's going to be about 2 weeks where the moon's going to get in our way for most deep sky observing. But this weekend will be a very good weekend if you're up for rising early in the middle of the night. And of course, then when it gets to be about the 26th, it's going to be a great time to start looking in the early evening all the way through to the new year. There's some nice debris in the sky to look for this month. We have 2 meteor showers going on. There's the Geminid meteor shower, and the Geminids are going to peak the next week, the morning of the 14th. That's a work day morning for a lot of us. And the moon is going to be in the gibbous phase, and it's going to be not set until about 3 a.m. in the morning. So if you want to watch Geminid meteors on a work night, you'll have to do so after 3 o'clock in the morning. Good luck with that. The Astronomy magazine says you can expect 150 meteors per hour under ideal conditions. And I, from experience, have a general rule that anytime they rate a meteor shower's ideal conditions, I divide that number by pi and come up with the real number that I'm more likely to see if I went out. So I'm going to guess that if you went out, you might see at least 50 per hour, but that's just me. But I've explained to you my method, so you can decide whether that's a valid method or not. Later in the month, the Ursid meteors peak, but they peak under a nearly full moon. So it's not, that's not the best meteor shower to use your credibility on by sitting out, in the cold. But just know that it is going on. I have captured one Geminid that I know of in my past, and if you do photograph meteors, always check up close to make sure that you either saw the meteor or that it has color, because more and more satellites are looking like meteors. And I've actually downgraded a number of my photos of meteors to satellites. So especially if it has color, that's probably a good sign that you've captured a meteor and not a satellite. Here's what I thought was my first Ursid meteor, and actually my only Ursid meteor. But as I look at it close up, it looks like it doesn't have any color, and I'm beginning to think that it looks a lot like many more satellite photos that I have. So good luck capturing meteors. The source of a lot of our meteors, of course, is comets, and we do have a couple comets in the night sky. This one here is Comet Leonard, and I took pictures of it here shown with the exact same equipment. So these pictures are taken with my 3-inch refractor. They're about a 30-second exposure at 800 ISO. And the difference in background reflects the atmospheric conditions at the time that I took these in the morning sky. But you can see on the right a brightening of the comet. So as the comet got closer over 5 days, it got predictably brighter. And I've only read today that people are observing that there's something wrong with the comet, that it's not brightening as much as they thought, making people wondering if the comet is going to fizzle or perhaps is breaking up. Won't really know that, but in the next couple days, we will be able to see it if it survives. It's near pass with the sun. We should be able to see it in the evening sky. Now, I was photographing it in the morning sky. It dove quickly downward, so it's going to show up in the evening sky, but it's going to come across at a very low angle to the horizon. So on December 12th, which is Sunday evening, using my reference of Venus, which is going to be about there still, the comet should be showing up low, below Venus to the right. And then throughout the week, it's going to move fairly quickly and also get smaller because it's getting farther away. And by the 20th, it should be out about there where I've marked here. And it's going to be getting smaller. So it's going to be getting dimmer. So there's some of it, one, it's the best chance to see it in its largest side is going to be on December 12th, but it's also going to be lower in the sky. So I hope that the weather and the sky conditions and the comet itself gives you a chance to see it. Here's a photo I'm going to show for comparison as to the apparent size of the comet right now. And so this is a photo I took back in November when the moon came very close to blocking my view of Venus. And that's the moon and Venus in my 3-inch telescope at prime focus. And here is the Comet Leonard, that I've thinking, to me, reminds me of a hammerhead comet, by the way, because it looks like it's kind of flattened like a hammerhead shark's head. But anyway, this is taken with the same equipment. And now I'm going to compare that to the same previous picture. So this gives you an idea of about how big the comet might look in comparison to the moon with whatever instrument you may be looking at it with. Most likely a pair of binoculars will be your best way to find it in the early evening. I did have a friend who back last week told me he was able to see it in a pair of 10 by 30 binoculars. That's the 30 millimeter kind of small binoculars. So I do hope you'll see it. There is a second comet that's fairly high. It's fairly bright. I think it's about magnitude 9. And this one's going to be high overhead in the middle of the night so that you're not as affected by the haze along the horizon or the setting sun or the rising sun. This one's, I hate to have to pronounce it, but Comet 67P. And then I'm not going to try to pronounce the rest, but this was taken by a friend of mine. But if you are out hunting comets, and Comet Leonard, which is probably going to be, magnitude 6, if all goes well. If Comet Leonard disappoints, you can always point straight up and go for this comet that's in the constellation Cancer. Looking at a bit of the deep sky, I'm going to just show a few things, a few of my favorite things and recent discoveries. As we look, sort of December is the tail end of autumn and it gets dark early. So it's a great time to do some early evening observing of some autumn objects. If you look to the west, you'll notice our southern triangle, our summer triangle, the very famous grouping there. And that is pretty much plunging into the west. So right now, this time of year, we can say goodbye to the summer triangle. It's taking the constellations with it as it, imagine Cygnus the Swan doing a nosedive into the western horizon. And if you look straight overhead, you'll see Pegasus. So when it gets dark, you go outside, you look straight up, that's going to have your best view, the less atmosphere you're looking through. You're going to see overhead the great square of Pegasus. I put in quotes because it's not really a square and it's not really all Pegasus, it's part Andromeda. And those are directly overhead and there's some very nice things to look at there. Here's a photo I've taken several years ago later in the evening, and it shows the constellations that are, imagine this photo, but these constellations are overhead, so they're going to be very good ones to look at. Anyway, there's a number of deep sky objects in there, like over here, some galaxies. This is one of my current projects, NGC 7331. It's a galaxy, looks a bit like the Andromeda galaxy, but a lot smaller. And next to it is Stephan's quintet, which is a group of galaxies that you do need fairly high power to resolve, but they show up. They will show up in a photograph with my 8-inch Schmidt Cassegrain at the f6.3. That's a shortened focal length. And also that interstellar asteroid, Oumuamua, its place where it's leaving is right here in Pegasus. So if you find Psi Pegasus, you can point to that and say, remember that asteroid? It's there. You know, it's going to be there for a long time from our point of view. And there's other few gems in the sky. NGC 253 is one of those things that is just like an amazing galaxy that I'm surprised doesn't get more attention. And this is one I took with my small refractor from my balcony by stacking just 5 images. And it's a really quite a beautiful galaxy to check out. Now, if you go directly overhead, also, you're going to see Cassiopeia and Andromeda overhead, which makes it also the best time to see objects like M31 and M33 and M76. I'm going to come back to that one in a bit. And there are a bunch of objects in Cassiopeia to look at while Cassiopeia is rotated high overhead. And I'm going to move my diagram just a little bit. I didn't have the picture where I wanted it, but there's an object up here called NGC 7662. And so that's also one of my recent projects. And it's a fairly bright nebula. And I'll come back, I'll show a picture of that in just a moment. And one more, if you look to the north, and imagine the constellation Cepheus as it's shown here, but rotated 90 degrees from where I've taken this picture, that would put the object NGC 40 as high as it's going to get. Here's the North Star. NGC 40 by this time of year is rotated up here, and it's going to be as high as you're going to get it throughout the year. And that has been a beautiful discovery. First of all, the NGCs kind of intimidate me because there's thousands of them. I even was ready to accuse them of starting at like 4,000 just to pad their count or something like that. So when I saw an NGC with the number 40, I thought that was great. I've got to have a look at something that's low of a number, and this is it. The other thing, it's a planetary nebula, shows up very red. And what was surprising me about that was that I'd only photographed green planetary nebula, almost to the point that I wasn't trusting my camera to photograph anything like red. And so I photographed this, it shows up a nice bright red, and it makes me realize, yes, my camera does capture red. And here's another view of it in which I just started stacking images. So here's a stack of about 10 30-second exposures taken through my Schmidt Cassegrain. So it's a very exciting object to look at, to study, and try to focus. It's fairly bright, shows up pretty well in the telescope. That is when you're taking a picture of it, 30 to 45 seconds does bring it in pretty well. And then here's another one. This is the NGC 7662. That is a planetary nebula in Andromeda. And this is taken with my small telescope, my 3-inch telescope. And this is taken and then cropped with my Schmidt Cassegrain. I forgot the specs of this image, but it's a beautiful object. And I find that I do just as well by taking a single image of this. Every time I tried to stack one, I'm not really getting much improvement. So I'm saying it's a very good one to start out on. You can get it with a single frame shot pretty well. And then last, the Little Dumbbell Nebula, which is M76, also up high overhead this time of year. And so that's another one of my projects, and another thing I'd recommend trying to look at or get an image of. And then last, as I was dropping my son off at school today, I noticed that there was a fog bow. So if you look right down the center of this picture, you can see the start of a rainbow-sized arc going up and to the right, and that's actually fog making the rainbow effect and rescattering the bent light so that we see it as just one big white thing. And it's a reminder that this time of year, not only do we get a beautiful sky, but sometimes we have to settle for the cloud bands of Earth. And so that's what I'm showing here in this last photo. So thank you for your time.
That was great, John. Thank you very much. Fascinating. Okay. Hi, my name is Reza, and I'm the current vice president of the club. I too would like to welcome you to the December 10th, 2021 general meeting of the Orange County Astronomers. Without further ado, let me go into introducing our speaker for this meeting. Our speaker at this meeting has lived and worked at far-ranging observatories in various technical capacities, including Mount Wilson, Yerkes, National Solar, Maria Mitchell, Venezuelan National, Chamberlain, and South Pole Station. He came to New Mexico in 1997 to assist in the final commissioning of the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. In the 1980s, he was an assistant editor at Sky and Telescope magazine. He is a member of many astronomical organizations, and he has recently been elected to the board of the century-old American Association of Variable Star Observers. He also told me that he has received a complimentary subscription to Sirius Astronomer, our monthly newsletter, since the middle 1980s. He holds his archive of Sirius Astronomer at the facility he maintains in New Mexico, the Astronomical Lyceum, which is a combination museum, library, laboratory, and lecture hall. Please join me in welcoming Mr. John Briggs. John.
Hi there, folks. Thank you for that very kind introduction. And folks, thank you all for being here. And I do hope you enjoyed the presentation. And I indeed feel a debt of gratitude going back for decades to Orange County Astronomers, because I really have enjoyed my subscription to to Sirius Astronomer. And I remember I've had communication with your treasurer, Charlie, all along for this. And I think it started when I was working at Sky and Telescope magazine, and I used some information from the newsletter for what we called back then an amateur brief. But you had some excellent news because, of course, your club is one of the outstanding astronomy clubs in the country, if not the world. I greatly admire your ANZA site and all that, but I should begin. Tell me, shall I share my screen now to begin these pictures?
Yes, please, John.
Okay, let's try it. There, and I'm going to get a couple things out of the way. So, my presentation to you all is more one of human adventure than science. It was my wonderful opportunity to winter over at South Pole Station back in 1994. And I'm very keen on history of astronomy, and I'm afraid so much time has passed that this presentation has become rather historical. The very interesting base that's maintained by the United States at South Pole Station has changed dramatically since my time there in 1994. But back in the beginning then, we were exploring the high Antarctic plateau for its potential for more sophisticated astronomical observations than what had occurred there up to that time. And in some respects, what we attempted did not pan out, but in other ways, certain observations pioneered have expanded tremendously and wonderfully at South Pole Station. But it's the human adventure of being at this extreme location on Earth that I want to share with you. That seems the most interesting and popular thing to most folks. And because South Pole Station becomes humanly impossible to get in and out of most of the year because of the extremely low temperatures. And because of that, it serves as a very interesting analog for what life is going to be like someday say, operating on a lunar base or some other profoundly removed human station in the solar system. And they actually study people and their behavior and functionality at South Pole with these long-term goals in mind. And our sociology back in '94 was also somewhat under the microscope. But anyway, let me begin. So I was an employee of Yerkes Observatory, shown here, operated by University of Chicago. Yerkes was let's see, page up. Let's see, page, let me try this one. Let me try this one.
Maybe you would need to click on the software, yeah. And then if you try page up, page down now.
There, thank you. Okay.
Sure.
You know, listeners, the hosts of this meeting understand the software better than I do, that I'm using, and I'm very grateful for it. But anyway, Yerkes Observatory is most famous for housing the great 40-inch refractor, which to this day is the largest in the world. 40-inch instrument dedicated in 1897. But back then, let's see, there, now we're working. Oh, pardon me, let's try this one. That's the one. There, okay. Back then, it had become funded by National Science Foundation to be Center for Astrophysical Research in Antarctica, which was a collaboration of many institutions with the goals that I described earlier. But let us begin with no further delay as I describe what it was like to spend an entire year at South Pole Station. I want to take you there and take you through the human experience. So how do you get there? You, at least from the United States, you fly to New Zealand, to the South Island, Christchurch, New Zealand. At Christchurch, there's a facility called International Antarctic Center, and that's where we were issued the extreme cold weather clothing and other personal equipment, having sent our sizes and dimensions and shapes and stuff ahead of time. And we awaited flight by more military style aircraft than the commercial flights that'll get you to Christchurch in New Zealand. The aircraft used between New Zealand and McMurdo Base on the Antarctic coast are typically LC-130 turboprop military transport airplanes. They're very different from commercial airplanes. Here's a scientist looking out one of the few windows on this big transport plane, but they were a lot of fun. The flight to Antarctica is 7.5 hours. Frequently, the flights have to turn around halfway because only if conditions appear perfect in terms of weather and mechanical aspects and everything, they're very conservative and they turn around halfway rather than take a chance. But it's very difficult because the weather forecasting in Antarctica is still very, very difficult. But finally, you approach to the continent, and for a while you are flying over the Transantarctic mountain range before you get into McMurdo. The glaciers are absolutely spectacular. I shot rolls of films of the glaciers and the huge crevasses. Of course, many people go to Antarctica just studying glaciology. So, but I looked down in wonder, but we'd never get to South Pole if I showed you all kinds of slides of glaciers. So we're just going to keep going for the sake of getting there. Now, here is the LC-130 aircraft and myself in younger and skinnier days back in the early 1990s. You can see that the airplane is unusual because it has skis that lower down below the wheels, allowing it to land on sea ice near McMurdo, or the pack ice on the high Antarctic plateau. There aren't too many of these LC-130 aircraft in the world. The ones that we were exploiting back in the early 90s, most of them happened to be operated by the New York State Air National Guard, of all things. But I tell you, when I got this picture, it was a slide, and when I got it back, I was in the company of one of my engineer friends beside me who had spent time with me on the ice. And of course, I was very proud of the picture because I thought I looked so cool there beside the airplane. And I passed the slide right over to my friend, and he said, "Oh, yeah, Briggs, you know, at least maybe you could have got your shirt buttoned straight." Well, of course, I don't care too much about the shirt now. I'm still happy to have the memento of younger glory days, but let's keep going. Okay, now you are likely to spend a good handful of days in your thumbs at McMurdo Base if your destination is South Pole Station. It's another 3.5-hour flight on one of those aircraft to get to South Pole. You take off eventually when it's scheduled, and there's likely to be a lot of equipment and supplies in the plane along with you and the other passengers. And eventually, though, things like the Transantarctic Mountains are long behind you, and you're looking down on what appears like a vast frozen ocean. It's the high Antarctic plateau. The ice is maybe 9,000 feet thick. And it's flatter than Kansas. It looks like a vast frozen ocean. And there's just nothing. Eventually, say from the cockpit, because in a situation like this, you can walk forward and enjoy the view from that the pilots have from the cockpit if you don't make a pest of yourself. Eventually, the tiny dark dot materializes on the horizon. It is South Pole Station. Man, it does not look like much as you approach it. But the aircraft descends. You sit down and and ski in on those big skis to South Pole Station. And here's an aircraft landing there. And what you see in the foreground is what they called the ceremonial South Pole, with a variety of flags around it. The base maintained a large inventory, maybe a very complete inventory, in fact, of international flags, just in case we got dignitaries from anywhere. And so you could put up a flag to match the nationality of visitors to the base. And there was a little flag, a little like a barber pole and a silver sphere there. But the funny thing is, and of course an American flag there too, this is not actually the real geodetically surveyed South Pole. The real geodetically surveyed South Pole was at least several hundred or maybe 1,000 feet away, a little less convenient to access. But the actual South Pole was marked with only a single flag, a United States flag, because after all, it's our tax dollars that are maintaining that base down there. So if you wanted your picture beside the real South Pole, the only thing that'd be present would be an American flag in case you whip something else out of your pocket. But anyway, let me keep going, because every picture suggests so many anecdotes to me, and I want to get through a lot of pictures. So you tumble out of the aircraft and you've got your cold weather clothing on. And this is this is very, very early January is when I arrived for my actual winter over visit. And at least back in those days, this giant geodesic dome was the heart of South Pole Station. It doesn't exist anymore. They've changed it, but I'm going to describe it to you as it was. You get out of the airplane and you look down there at that front door, and it's a great big front door, and the sign says, "The United States of America welcomes you to Amundsen Scott South Pole Station." And you sort of take a big gulp as you begin trudging down towards that orifice there, like some kind of entry to hell, because you realize this is going to be your home for a coming year and or nearly a year. You're kind of wondering, well, gee, I wonder what it's really going to be like. I wonder how I'll manage, but it's also very exciting. The temperature might be about -30 or -40 degrees, but not necessarily uncomfortable compared to what is coming. But let's see. Okay, what's it like inside the dome? The dome is was about 160 feet in diameter at its base. And this picture is taken with an extreme wide-angle fisheye lens, 9mm Nikon fisheye that I happen to have with me, or borrowed from one of our fellow institutions. And there's distortion with the lens. That bright opening to the upper right was actually directly overhead. That's a ventilation hole, and I'm going to say more about it in the next slide or two. But the large white spot is an open ventilation hole directly overhead. But that's me on the left and one of my friends on the right. The dome was nothing more than a wind break and a break against blowing snow. The red buildings inside were the heated structures, and that's where we really lived. The building on the right was actually a dormitory facility, and you can only see but a little bit of it. The building on the left happened to be our dining hall or galley and recreational facilities. But let me show you around a little bit more. This is with a little telephoto lens looking at the very top of the geodesic dome. So you see how the ventilation apertures that I mentioned are up there. Now, they are maybe about 3 feet in diameter, each one of those holes. You see that there's an American flag kind of tattered, blowing in the wind, but there's a lot of ice crystals. Well, they are telling a story because it's an aluminum geodesic dome. And there's humidity. There's more humidity under the dome maybe than normally in the outside air because of the human activity, the kitchen, the exhaust from Caterpillar tractors and things like that that are driving in and out. You know, there's water vapor coming off in the exhaust of such things. In any case, the relatively warm air and smoke escaping up through these apertures is containing moisture. Well, any water molecules that come in contact with that very cold structure or the ice crystals that have already formed there have just made the ice crystals grow all the larger. So they are continuously growing given the source of humidity inside the dome. And this is sort of telling part of the story of why we were there for astronomy, because naturally the South Pole low temperature atmosphere is extremely dry, and it is water vapor that absorbs near infrared radiation, also many microwave wavelength radiations, but these are wavelengths that are of great interest observationally. So among our goals back in 1994, which would involve our winter was the very first winter staffed by CARA's own scientists and technicians. Our goals back then were to confirm the transparency of the air as anticipated, and to continue microwave observations, which had already begun there. Well, I'll be explaining all about that a little bit more later, but let's go outside the dome. If I remember the next picture, yes. In this shot, I've climbed on top of the dome somehow, and I'm lying on my belly beside one of those apertures with that Nikon fisheye looking through. And I've got two of my friends spread-eagled underneath there to dramatize exactly how I would have splattered if I had slipped through the aperture, which was extremely unlikely, but it still was a surprisingly creepy place to be up top there because everything is very frosty and there are all those ice crystals. But the picture allowed me to show you how there are three main buildings there were inside the dome. The one on the lower right, the dormitory, which is a two-story building. The one at the top was mainly the galley and some recreational facilities. The one on the left was an administrative building, a weather laboratory, some other miscellaneous laboratory space, and particularly a large communication center on that left-hand building. Communications between South Pole and the rest of the world, interestingly, at least back in 1994, could not be taken for granted. We still used ham radio. We had very, very limited access to the internet. But just to put it in a short sentence, communications were still surprisingly difficult, and I suspect they are to this day. But the one thing I do want to point out, in the dormitory buildings, see there are a lot of, they look like white windows or something. Well, they're not. They're actually doorways, kind of, but they look more like refrigerator doorways or meat locker doors. Well, I believe that's exactly what they were. Every room in the dormitory had an emergency escape hatch, which they had been recently installed, and it seemed like the National Science Foundation administrators were especially proud of them. These emergency escape hatch meat locker doors. So you would think that wintering over at Pole, one would receive some very special training on how to avoid freezing to death. But in fact, I received no such training, but we all did receive rather elaborate training on how to avoid burning to death, because in fact, a fire was considered a grave concern at South Pole. These were fundamentally wood frame buildings. And so we had all kinds of fire training. I got to keep moving. But so the idea was, if there's a fire, I mean, you'd be right here in your little bedroom, and it's really quite warm inside, and so you'd be rather casually dressed, to put it politely. And if there's a fire, you could pop right out the emergency escape hatch to the environment inside the dome, which was very typically -50 degrees, and at least escape the fire to some other kind of situation. But let's keep on going. This shot is inside the galley, the dining hall, because the base was built by Navy engineers, the Navy Seabees. Much of the jargon that was used around the base was still nautical in flavor, so we referred to the dining hall as the galley. This shot is actually a little out of sequence because I'm trying to be chronological going through the year, but this particular shot of people in the galley is actually taken from the middle of the winter rover, when there were only 27 of us there, as I recall, during the frenzied few months of the intense summer season when airplanes can fly in and out. Back in the 90s, there might have been as many as 140 people there, but in the middle of the winter, there were only more like 27. So the folks here, my colleagues, many of us had particularly long and maybe somewhat greasy hair, and all of which becomes entirely normal in the middle of the long winter over. And hot water and things like that are always, well, almost always in short supply at South Pole Station. But let's keep going here. Okay, here was my bedroom. And there you're seeing the emergency escape hatch that I've been referring to. And I always somewhat apologetically point out that there's there's some artwork on the wall. I was not responsible for that artwork. I inherited it along with the room. But I may not have been guilty for the artwork, but I was guilty of something. I think I spent nearly a year living in this room without painting it over, and therefore I spent too much time wondering what was going through the mind of the person who tagged the wall like that before me. Anyway, the rooms were Spartan, but comfortable enough under the circumstances. We were all relatively young adults. In many respects, the social environment, it reminded me of maybe like being back in a college dormitory again, but now as a young adult, maybe hopefully slightly more mature than in college days, but with a lot of the same camaraderie and friendship that one would establish in a college dormitory situation, and it was really very nice in a lot of ways. There were 7 women and 20 men, as I recall my year, but I better keep going. This is, of course, in the inside circumference of the geodesic dome. And there's a fellow standing there, and that happened to be our winter over chef. And as we were first getting acquainted with him, he joked with us a little bit. He bragged that his former employer, his former situation had been with the CIA. Oh, well, and he explained the CIA was actually the Culinary Institute of America in New York City. If you want to go become a chef for the Ritz-Carlton or something, going to Culinary Institute of America is like going to the Harvard of cooking schools. So he was a very well-trained chef. And I mention that only to dramatize that the National Science Foundation tries to feed people very well who are wintering over at South Pole. There are a lot of interesting psychological consequences. It's like cabin fever in Australia, in Alaska. You simply get burned out. Wintering over at a place like South Pole, it's easy to get depressed and discouraged. They measure it scientifically at the end of every winter over. A Navy psychiatrist comes in and interviews all the participants, and to quantify our state of depression. Well, they don't want us to be depressed about food, so they send a good chef and good food, a lot of Alaskan king crab legs and steaks and all kinds of things. But they of course they send a well-rounded diet. There was a great big stack of boxes near the stairway up to my dormitory room that I noticed because I walked by it so many times that year. It was frozen okra. Well, I'm afraid we ignored the frozen okra. And Ed, our chef here, the boxes beside him went around the entire circumference of the dome, and most of it was all leftover food from previous winters. Things, I guess, like frozen okra. Ed claimed to have done a calculation looking at the food inventory, profoundly frozen food. And he believed that if the world ended and nobody came back to get us, well, we would have had enough stuff to eat for like 7 years. The only problem is it would have all been stuff like frozen okra. Of course, the other more practical problem would have been we did not have enough fuel to keep the place warm for 7 years. So we would have run out of something else besides okra before resolving that crisis. The only thing else I'll point out is notice there's a great tongue of snow at Ed's feet, and he's standing beside a ladder. He's standing beside what was in effect a chimney going out and up from the edge of the dome that was another emergency escape avenue, like if a fire broke out inside the dome. So you could get out of your dorm room through that meat locker hatch in your underwear, you know, and you could run over where Ed was standing in theory, and you go up that metal ladder, and then, because maybe too much smoke in the dome or whatever, and you go up that chimney and then outside. And of course, then you're outdoors in the South Pole environment, which is also a difficult situation to resolve. But it turns out, of course, there are other buildings that we could go running off to in a really dire emergency. So actually, though it's fun to joke about it, things really had been thought out very beautifully and scientifically to make life comfortable and safe there. But still, I like to joke about it. Okay, so here's the dome from the outside, at least during the daytime. And now, mind you, at South Pole, the celestial equator is lined up with our apparent horizon. And so the Earth is turning, but nothing rises or sets, nothing stellar. The sun, therefore, appears to wrap around the base as the Earth turns. And the only effective change of the sun's altitude is because of its changing southerly declination in the sky. And so the altitude of the sun changes very, very slowly. So this was early after my arrival, but what I really want to point out here is notice how the big dome, well, the snow has encroached upon it. Well, the snow has actually been dug away from the dome, because I want to emphasize that anything built on the high Antarctic plateau is very soon covered by blowing snow. There's not much precipitation every year. I think it's only like 4, 5, or 6 inches of ice crystals of snow, additional participation each year. But if you've got a physical structure right on the ground surface, the aerodynamics of blowing snow tends to cover it. So here they have relatively recently, with machinery, dug snow away from that dome, so it's not crushed by blowing snow. I'll say more about that kind of stuff as we go on, but I must press forward because I have the images I've got to get through. This is inside an archway that was a tremendous place that was right near the dome, and it was in fact essentially buried, but there was no harm to that. What's being seen here, if you could see the motion of my mouse, these great big shiny things, what are they? Tan color, I guess. They are like giant water beds. Okay, they're, of course, they were fuel bladders. Now, but one of my friends is right here. I'm circling him. He's lying down on this fuel bladder. It's like a water bed. It looks like it's like 30 feet square on a side. Okay, his head is towards us. One arm is going one way, the other arm is going off to the other way, and his feet are away from us. And then way down, farther away in the archway, there's a human figure right there walking away from us, just to dramatize the size of this archway and how many fuel bladders. I'll count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think there's at least 8 of these in there. So what was the function? With each of the ballpark 140 flights every summer season between McMurdo and South Pole Station, those big LC-130 aircraft would arrive to South Pole with a surplus of fuel. And some of that fuel would be regurgitated by the aircraft into these fuel bladders to puff up these water beds, these fuel beds, and get them all puffy full again, so that this aviation diesel could be drawn upon through the cold winter when there weren't airplanes to keep supplying things. And so the fuel powered a huge diesel electric generator that provided the electricity and the electric heat, but also the powerful exhaust from that diesel electric generator. There was a glycol loop in that exhaust, and the glycol was getting very hot, and then it was pumped around the station through radiators to heat in a more conventional way by capturing some of the waste heat from the generators. So anyway, that's the way it was back in '94, and I doubt that it's changed too much since then. Okay, this shot, boy, it was a very momentous day. You see the cloud in the sky. It's actually the contrail of the last aircraft of that summer season. As the aircraft left, our winter rover began. And I remember I went out with the camera and I was kind of playing photojournalist, and I got in the faces of my friends. Obviously, all 27 of us came out to watch that plane go. And I think just about everybody had a fairly serious expression on their face, because it is a very thoughtful moment for everybody personally to watch the plane go and realize, well, it has really begun. And what's it going to be like, at least for those of us who had not wintered there before. And so, like so many zombies, we trundled back towards the station when the plane was gone. But what did we do? We declared a party day. It was actually very nice to have the last of the summer horde out of our face. We broke out the beer, and we all gathered together and we watched videos of two infamous science fiction movies, The Thing from 1950, and then The Thing from the 1970s, or was it the early 80s? Of course, both of these movies have the theme, the frozen monster from outer space in the Arctic or the Antarctic unfreezes and comes up and it eats everybody. And of course, the later version was directed by John Carpenter, and it surely had to be rated X for violence. So it was just a wonderful way to start winter rover at South Pole Station with a fine party. Anyway, let me show you now finally just a few of my friends from the winter rover doing their jobs. We had two ladies who were our winter rover meteorologists. This is Anne, one of those gals with among the more quaint of their many meteorological instruments. There's devices somewhat like sundials, but they had glass spheres that would actually focus sunlight, at least if it was clear out. Sunlight would be focused a very short distance onto an interchangeable strip of paper. And the paper, even at South Pole temperatures, would be marked black by the light, the focused light of the sun. And thus, this instrument would automatically record sunny, clear weather. But because the sun was going round and round horizontally and not just overhead and then below the ground, Anne needed two of these devices to get the total record for the 24-hour sunshine. I'm interested in history of instruments, and I just thought this thing was particularly cool and quaint and made in England a long time ago, and it was just neat. Here is a fellow named Brent, and he was a very clever engineer. He was our communications engineer, and he is beside this dish, which was our communications lifeline to one geosynchronous satellite to which we had access for internet communication. And I believe that my year, 94, was the very first year that general station staff, like myself, could actually enjoy typing their own email messages, like to loved ones and stuff. Now, they weren't terribly private, given how they were relayed and monitored by National Science Foundation to make sure nobody was going nuts and things of that nature. But at least a week I could type my own email without typing it and passing it in for somebody else to relay. In fact, in 94, one of the information technicians called me into his lab in the middle of the winter when the internet was up. And he said, hey, John, let me show you something. If you haven't ever seen this before, well, he knew I had never seen it before because it was brand new. I went in there and he said to me, John, this is what they call a web page. He was so proud that he was able to download it because our communications was not very fast. But I saw my first web page back in '94 at South Pole Station. We only had access to the geosynchronous satellite about 5 hours a day because it was an old one. It had run out of stabilizing fuel or something, and only a handful of hours every day did it oscillate or precess or whatever, did it shift enough in declination to become high enough in our sky to be in our field of view. The bottom line, again, we could not take communications at all for granted at South Pole Station. Okay, here's a fellow science technician named John, looking like the angel of death. He is actually standing above a seismograph station. The seismograph was in a little cabin, but you wouldn't know it because the cabin had been covered by blowing snow. So what they do with a scientific installation like this, they build a chimney on it so that you can, as the snow builds up, well, you just go climb down the chimney on a ladder to get into the cabin where there's a seismograph. So that's what he was doing. But let's see here. I actually photographed in more detail what he did in another location. Here, they hadn't built the chimney taller recently enough, so he had to dig it out. So he dug it out, and here it's exposed, the hatch, and he's exhaling. He looks like a dragon. Now, the thing is, every human exhalation in the atmosphere of South Pole would look like this. The condensation, you'd have to watch for it if you didn't want it in the picture, because it would always clutter the picture of a person working or standing. But in this case, I let him keep it because I wanted to dramatize it a little bit. The cold, dry air with every exhalation created a cloud of condensation like this. And of course, we just got entirely used to it. Notice behind John, the rope line, and those are bamboo poles with flags. Those ropes were all put up, radiating out from the heart of the base after the last plane left. It was just one of the chores, getting ready for the darkness of winter. The idea was if you went to some scientific station or someplace away from base, you needed to have an emergency backup for getting back. Because if you, for example, if John goes down to a seismograph and spends some time with it, it's always possible for weather to very suddenly blow in, creating a complete whiteout. So the idea was he could come up out of there, discover a whiteout situation where you just can't see anything, but you could follow the rope back to safety. And so there were a lot of ropes like this as safety lines. Did I ever believe that they were like really necessary? I never felt the need to use one because you could hear the generator. Then there were other clues, even when you couldn't really see, and even in the darkness, it was in my experience, it's not like I ever needed the rope, but it was nice to know they were there. But anyway, let's go down. Here's what it was like down in the cabin near the seismograph. Talk about a refrigerator-like environment that really needs defrosting. That's showing you how far the chimney extended, so-called chimney. So John has come down the chimney like a scientific Santa Claus, and the seismograph would be inside some small heated chamber. But I simply focused on the ice crystals. I took my glove off because the ice crystals that naturally formed all over everything were just so big and beautiful and fascinating. And I wanted to convey a size of the ice crystals with the help of my fingers. It was negative 50 degrees in there, so my glove was not off long, and it's not like I was making snowballs or anything like that either. But again, this shot dramatizes the phenomenon. Any humidity in the air down in this little chamber, when water molecules came in contact with the walls, they would stick. They would form crystals, and then the crystals would get bigger and the air would get drier. So it's telling a story related to the general profound dryness of the air that related to our astronomical goals down there. A couple of other fellows, they are actually kind of in the end of what was in effect like a big garage, but obviously they're preparing a weather balloon. Well, a very specialized weather balloon. It actually was an ozone sonde. I'll show you. They're launching this thing. It's going to go up to 80,000, 90,000 feet. The ozone sonde was a sensor. The fellow on the left is holding it. As I recall, they cost about $3,000 a piece. It would sniff out the ozone concentration. These fellows were among their duties were to collect data on the ozone hole above Antarctica. The fellow on the right had the easy job. The fellow on the left had the hard job, because the fellow on the right, all he had to do was go like this to let the balloon go, but the guy on the left had to run along until the balloon got stretched out completely. And it's safe. You don't want your ozone sonde to be bouncing along on the snow for a while before it takes off, in case that would wreck it. But off it would go, and they would run back into their lab and listen to the radio information coming back down and make a record of the ozone concentration. And of course, never to see that balloon or that ozone sonde again, but at least it didn't get wrecked during launch. And they only had enough of these things to last through the winter, so they were very careful about it. And they did many other things. They also studied the ozone, interestingly, by looking at the moon spectroscopically. They had a big laboratory spectroscope. They fed it with moonlight in the wintertime, and by the absorption features of ozone relative to the solar spectrum of the moonlight, they could infer something about ozone concentration. I just thought that was interesting how they did it. The building on the lower right, notice it's a big building. It's up on stilts. It was brand new. It was really still under construction. It was actually an emergency destination for us if disaster had fallen upon us in the big dome. And also notice the dish is on top of that building. That's where I took the photograph of Brent, the communications engineer. But that building up on stilts exemplifies the more modern South Pole architecture that allows blowing snow to pass underneath buildings so as to not accumulate so much. And by the way, around those chimneys, I should have pointed out before, there were interesting aerodynamic effects you could see of the way the snow is building up, because the wind at South Pole blows predominantly out of one direction, and I gather that contributes to the way snow builds up, but I got to keep going. A great deal of time has passed since that airplane left. I've compressed it in these pictures. Finally, the sun is getting low. Shadows are getting long. It takes a long time for the sun to shift in the southern sky back towards the celestial equator, back towards our apparent horizon. Unfortunately for us, sunset was clouded. And I was discouraged by this. We had a big storm that lasted several days. We missed sunset. If you're lucky enough to be wintering over at South Pole and have a clear sunset, the last limb bit of the sun rolls along the sky, the horizon, slowly, as the sun slowly changes declination, And there can be a green flash. There can be a very, very bright green flash, but the sun is not going up or down as fast as it appears from other places on Earth, because the sun is mainly moving to the apparent left as the Earth turns. The green flash can last 45 minutes. A friend of mine witnessed it a year or two before I wintered. The entire world is bathed in green emerald light. It has got to be one of the rarest natural phenomena that a human can experience, because you've got to be wintering at pole, first of all, and then be lucky enough to get a clear sunset. Well, I didn't get it. We had a storm. When the storm cleared, we were at least rewarded with a beautiful full moon. And this picture is showing the new building, which was our astronomy laboratory. And we had a 24-inch reflecting telescope in that fold-away cover up top. And interestingly, a 6-inch refractor, and that thing that sort of looks like a TARDIS closer to the top of the staircase. But I got to keep going. This graph, which happens to be data from 1992, and it's showing the entire year in time. These are days of the year from the first day up to over 361 there. It's temperature. It happens to be in degrees C. But note the red line is a running average. The darker line are the true day-to-day fluctuations. The temperature gets cold as the sun gets to the horizon. Notice January 1st, February 1st, March 1st, around March 21st or whenever it is, the sun sets at South Pole because it moves in the northern hemisphere sky. The sunlight is gone. It's still a lot of twilight, but the sun is gone. It gets cold. Notice the running average is immediately essentially as cold as it's going to get. It gets a little colder right there. But look how violently the temperature changes from one day to the next in the darker graph. The point is, although this is degrees C, -40 and C and -40 Fahrenheit are the same on the scales, but these extrema here, these extrema are below -100 Fahrenheit. But notice how violently it changes. If you get used to it being maybe only around -80 Fahrenheit or something like that, and it zips up until it's only something like -30, it is very surprising how warm -30 feels when you have become accustomed to what it's like functioning outdoors in the clothing in very extreme temperatures. I'm not fooling on that. It's surprising how warm -30 can feel. So what's it like in the twilight? There's the front door again. The windblown snow is beginning to encroach upon the front door. They're not bothering to dig it out anymore. There was a day in the twilight when it was below -100 Fahrenheit, and I thought, well, I want to go out and take some pictures on a day that I'll always remember. It was below -100. So I went out and walked around the dome just to record these pictures. This was the day. It really wasn't that different from many, many others, except it happened to be a good cold day. Here you are seeing that emergency escape chimney that our Winter Rover chef Ed had been standing beside at the bottom on the inside. So if something really bad happened in the dome, of course, you would have the recourse of climbing up this thing and then climbing down a ladder there and standing around it, of course, in safety, right? Here's a ladder going up the outside of the dome. That's what I used to go up and take a picture looking down through the hole. That was a little adventure, but of course that was during the daytime. Let's keep going there. Okay, so after the sun has gotten low enough to put astronomical twilight fully behind us, what's it like walking outdoors when it's truly dark for South Pole? I'll show you. The main door has been closed, but you still have a man door to go in and out. So you walk outdoors and you've got all your clothing on, and man, it's the wind, the snow's blowing, so you feel like you're at the bottom of some crater on the moon or something. You're looking up at the stars. Let's climb up and out of the crater and look around. And this is one of the things that was close by, a gamma ray telescope run by University of Wisconsin, by looking at Cherenkov radiation light in the Earth's atmosphere when gamma rays decay high in the atmosphere. We actually collaborated with University of Wisconsin folks a little bit on technical details of this telescope. But look at the constellations. This is, of course, that's Sirius. And I'm sure many people here will recognize the constellations. Canis Sirius is in Canis Major. But of course, Canis Major here is entirely upside down compared to what we're accustomed to. And because we're at South Pole. Now, trickier thing, down here looking through the framework of the telescope, I'll put the tip of the mouse right above it. There's a little pink glow right there, little pink glow. And you think about a little bit about it, the belt of Orion is right on the celestial equator. So the belt of Orion is down here somewhere. That's the Great Orion Nebula, because it's at about -4.5, -5 degrees declination. So if you're walking outside, if you could see with your eyes the pink glow of Orion Nebula, you knew that the perpetually wind-blown ice crystals were not too thick on that night, if you could see Orion Nebula, because at least they weren't higher than 4.5 or 5 degrees in the horizon around us. But it was fun. You really felt it like it was another world, at least I, from the Northern Hemisphere, looking at these stars from such a unique place and perspective. Of course, essentially every time you went outdoors, there would be some aurora somewhere in the sky. The South Pole Station is well inside what they call the auroral oval. So the intensity of the southern lights is not actually that great at South Pole Station, but occasionally they flare out and flare up. And one night, oh, my connection is unstable, but let's hope you still hear me. One night, there was an arch that bisected the entire celestial vault overhead. So I thought that looks cool. This is a wide angle lens, and I set it up on a tripod, and the arch was sort of stationary. It was quiescent, and it was cutting the sky in half like a meridian line, our local Great Meridian, and it was cool. So I took this picture. I think it was a 17mm lens, and there's a star right here. I'm going to leave my mouse right near that star as I advance to the next slide, because I could go kind of long with this picture because the aurora wasn't moving, but then it began to move. So I took this other picture, and there's the same star because I haven't moved my camera, but it's a shorter exposure. You can't see so many faint stars because the aurora had begun to move suddenly, and I didn't want it to all get blurred out, but I just had a little fun with these shots. And I think the next shot, there we go. This was the night that I happened to see the most aurora raining down all over the sky. You see the silhouette of the big dome. The light is coming up through those openings. There's the flagpole and the flag that I mentioned before. This is illuminated exhaust from the diesel electric power plant. There's kind of like a street light over there, but it was a lot of fun. Of course, nowadays, people with more sophisticated electronic cameras than I had on film. I was shooting all film back in '94. There were some advantages to that, but the Winter Rover photos of the sky nowadays are much more beautiful than what I got, but I'm still, of course, very proud because nobody else, '94, got pictures quite like these. One of my tasks was to climb this meteorology tower. Notice that, of course, the Milky Way and Scorpius in the background. There's Antares. Here's the tail of the scorpion, the stinger, and the tail, and then the claws. Of course, it's all upside down compared to what we're used to. the heart of the Milky Way. Here's the teapot of Sagittarius, and there's the spout and the steam coming off the spout with that beautiful star cloud towards the heart of our galaxy. But this meteorology tower, we were interested in seeing in air turbulence. How bad was the air turbulence and making the telescope images look blurry? Well, one way to approach that question is to literally measure temperature changes in the air. So we had temperature sensors on this meteorology tower going up its height. And so this is my favorite selfie from that year. And you can see that I'd only been outside probably 4 minutes, but I pulled back my hood and I'm exhaling so that, and I'm holding my breath now for the sake of this photograph, but with that cloud of water vapor around one's face, the water vapor, the moisture freezes immediately onto your eyebrows and your eyelashes, and the thing is, you get used to it. It's really not as uncomfortable as it looks once you get used to it. On the other hand, if you pull off the Freddy Krueger face mask there, and if you exposed your ears to the South Pole temperatures for more than about a minute and a half, you would begin immediately. In a minute and a half, you'd begin to feel the pinch of frostbite on the tender bits of your ears. So it was very important to be covered up. But for the sake of photographs, I would expose myself a little bit like this. But anyway, inside the tin cans were microthermal sensors, and we had a Celestron 8 at the top of the tower. The thing is, there's a huge thermal gradient going up. It gets warmer. The air gets warmer, dramatically warmer above as you ascend away from the ice. And it was my job to run these sensors, and I won't go into the details, but a graduate student friend in Australia got a PhD thesis as a result of the data that we collected with these sensors regarding the microthermal environment at South Pole Station. Here's a Celestron 8, the same one actually, down on the ice level, on the ground level. I learned that you can use acetone, which does not freeze at South Pole temperatures, acetone on a soft cloth to wash ice crystals off the corrector plate and keep a telescope surprisingly functional, although it was still somewhat inconvenient to use a Celestron 8 at the geographic South Pole. I can sure testify to that. Here's a picture back at our main laboratory where we had the 24-inch telescope. You can actually see it up here with the baby buggy cover folded down. This here actually had a 6-inch refractor that was there sort of experimentally. Here's the telescope that we had built in quite a rush at University of Chicago. 24-inch f10 Cassegrain optimized for near infrared, observing at around 2.4 microns wavelength, with a great big camera, twin to one that had been developed for Apache Point Observatory here in New Mexico. That's Joe Spang. He's the fellow who operated the gamma ray telescope for University of Wisconsin, but he helped us out because something special went on in 1994, as I'll get to in just another slide or two. Here's up top, the cover's folded down, the telescope is pointed up. It looks like a daytime shot, but it wasn't. I think the moon was out, and Cirrus there is not really Cirrus. That's a glow of auroral band and other things I'll talk about in a minute. So the highlight, a highlight of 94, of course, was that famous comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 had been discovered, and it had been calculated that the comet fragments, the comet had already been ripped to shreds, captured by Jupiter, but it was orbiting back and towards Jupiter, and all of the fragments were colliding in. And this all happened in July of 1994, which happened to be the first winter rover of the CARA science project. And it was the first winter rover of our 24-inch infrared telescope. So this here is the disk of Jupiter. which does not shine very brightly at 2.3 or 2.4 microns. The Galilean moons, however, are very bright. But something was going on. Something had been lingering in the atmosphere of Jupiter, here labeled G, but on schedule, according to an ephemeris calculated by Jet Propulsion Laboratory. We knew over the course of an entire week when to go out there and start activating the camera very intensely, snapping pictures as quickly as we could, because the impact of the next fragment was predicted plus or minus 3 minutes standard deviation. Indeed, right on schedule, something began to happen. Sure enough, fragment H, coming after G, was impacting Jupiter and rotating around, so we could see the hot spot in Jupiter's atmosphere. And a very few moments later, it's so bright, it's saturating our detector. But then over the course of time, the impact of this fragment, fragment H, subsided, and until the next one came along. So we had a great deal of fun observing this. It was not part of our scientific objective, but another friend, this guy at University of Chicago, got a PhD thesis based on these data that we collected. So that was fun. It was just fun being there. And we got some cool press and attention, because it was such a unique place to be for such a unique event. Kerry Vigu, our good friend, our winter over electrician, before he went outside. Kerry Vigu, about 30 or 40 minutes, having been outside, came back in again. That's what he looked like. What Kerry had been doing, it had been a very special day, although he went outside a lot. This is a special shot. Remember that tall building with the dish with the Brent, the engineer? I'm on top of that building again, but I've got a very wide angle lens. I'm looking out across the plateau. That's the moon. There's a bright moon. These here are diesel fueled campfires. As I recall, they were actually spaced by about 300 feet, if I recall what the number was. So we're looking over a vast expanse here, but maybe just barely you can see there's red dots in the sky, because this is a time exposure, but it's dot, 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 dot. This is because it's a big jet Air Force transport flying overhead. The campfires are trying to define a drop zone. This was midwinter airdrop. Let me show you what it meant. Kerry Vigu had been outside trying to help collect the 25 or so big crates that had been dropped by parachute. This is Ed opening the crate, one of the crates. Everybody was involved on station. It only happens once all winter long, so it was a big deal. The crates were picked up by a giant tractor out on the ice. One of them was never found. Something went wrong, but at least we got like 25 out of 26 or 24 out of 25. But anyway, we got as many as we could. They did not land very accurately in the drop zone. The whole thing is done as an exercise and sort of as a, I don't know, as an act of mercy for South Pole Station. The packages are disgorged inside the dome, but the contents are quickly carried indoors because you don't want some of the things to freeze. Some of the boxes landed kind of hard and got mushed, but most things survived just fine. What did they contain? Very important replacement parts, like for our liquid nitrogen generator, fresh vegetables, letters from loved ones, gag gifts for morale, all kind of stuff, important stuff and fun stuff. This guy drove the big tractor. He had the worst case of frostbite we had all winter. It's his cheeks. He didn't bother to put a face mask on. When they found a package, he would come over with a tractor, but then a big one, jump out of the big Caterpillar tractor, help them push the box into the big scoop, and then take it into the base. But he wasn't bothering to wear a face mask, so his cheeks got a little rosy. He recovered fine, but it just goes to show you've got to be careful. Just a constellation shot here. Again, it's the Milky Way. The Tamara's on a tripod is vibrating. The stars are trailed because it must have been a 5-minute exposure. Scorpius again. A little bit of auroral display, and a distant berm, a berm of equipment and materials just left out to winter over in the cold, but something important to save for later. Well, the most advanced and sophisticated experiment that our team was involved with was operated by this young man, John Kovac. This device, it was a bolometer, the sensor for his microwave radio telescope. He was studying with his team the cosmic microwave background radiation. So the bolometer is basically a very elaborate and sensitive thermometer to microwave radiation. John is calibrating it by looking at a tray down here of liquid nitrogen. Nobody had ever wintered over an instrument as complicated as this apparatus before. The other of our 3 Kara teammates, Hien, is here. John is smiling because after a long winter struggling to make this very complicated Dewar vacuum apparatus work in the cold, it's beginning to work right, and he's smiling at the results. And the instrument was carried back out to the radio telescope from our laboratory. And this is actually the shield, the shelter for the radio telescope. And here is John, that thing at the bottom of this sky shield, the parts in the middle, that's actually the radio telescope. It looks like this is maybe one big dish for one, but no, it was a sky shield. I've climbed up a ladder to look down at John and at his instrument. The material around him, the walls around him, were to keep the radiation of the Earth away from his instrument. He's struggling here with the instrument, trying to make it work to track the sky, even before the Dewar had been installed. But finally, he got it working just barely before the end of the winter. But twilight was returning. I've compressed a great deal of time into these slides. John went on to a postdoc at Caltech. Well, went on to PhD at University of Chicago, a postdoc at Caltech, and now he's a professor at Harvard University. The sunlight, however, was returning. I'm just going to quickly take you through some shots of the twilight. Again, it's a long, long, lingering twilight. So a great deal of time is being compressed through these changes. That's the moon and Venus. The winter was coming to an end. We were what we called toasty, which was a way of referring to burnout. It's inevitable. The moon and Venus aligned like this. And for me, a real Stanley Kubrick moment, to be at South Pole with an alignment. Unfortunately, sunrise was again stormy, so there was no green flash, but it cleared, and man, were the shadows long. Various dome station shores. We had some kind of explosive thing, a starter gun or something, a very loud noise to break loose ice crystals from the inside of the dome. Joe Spang, who was a dear friend, getting a haircut. He was afraid his mother would be shocked by his beard. Everybody, we had a lot of laughs. We had a very harmonious winter socially. We just became very tight friends, and we had a lot of laughs and a lot of silly parties. I'm afraid nobody was more silly than I was. Notice though, Joe is not trying to be silly with those big shoes. Those were our standard issue extreme cold weather boots. And we got so acclimated to those, we'd wear them like slippers, even indoors, those big, heavy things. There's nothing staged about this photo. The communications technician doing the hair cutting, she's got them on too. We were just completely acclimated to wearing our big shoes. They're actually very soft and they're surprisingly comfortable. Thumper Porter, our general maintenance mechanic, took the prize for the most impressive winter rover pants. Finally, again, such time compressed, the first plane returned. It's quite a moment. Again, everybody is outside. Janet Phillips, who was our station manager, had the honor of parking the first plane with this choreography of hand signals. Notice finally here in the background, there's a sign and a single American flag. That was the geodetically marked, surveyed South Pole. And far beyond it, that's the astronomy laboratory where some of those other pictures were recorded. That was farther from the heart of the base than anybody had ever functioned during the winter before. Anyway, Janet's parking the first plane. And man, it's an emotional moment to see this thing come in. It's loud, the noise. It's a very dramatic thing. The diesel fumes is really something, and on one hand it's emotional because on one hand we are really eager to get the heck out of there, to put it politely, but on the other hand, this place has become our home. We have bonded with it. It's such a special place. It's such a unique place. We have felt special and unique as well, but soon our relationship with it is passing away. And so as excited as we are, it's a bittersweet moment too. Our winter rover is ending. But with that signal there, it symbolizes the end of the winter rover because Janet is telling the pilot he's perfectly parked. He can feather his props. The door opens and out comes the new crew. And it's hugs and kisses all around, and the cycle of activity of winter rover at South Pole begins anew. Thank you very much for your attention and the opportunity to share this experience with you. I really feel a debt to the Orange County astronomers, and to some degree a small step towards repaying it for the newsletter for decades. Thanks a lot, folks.
Thank you very much, John. That was a great adventure. What a story, what a story. And given it was in 90s, it's still fresh. I could feel how it was there. That was great. Thank you very much for sharing that with us.
You're very welcome.
So now let me remind everybody that the floor is open for your questions. Please use the Q&A bottom to ask questions. And John, you wanted to see the questions yourself, so you could use the Q&A, and we already have a question.
I'm seeing the chat, but help call any of them to my attention, and I'm happy to respond however I can. There's so much to be said about the experience, and I'm afraid that I can give the same presentation and make it absolutely feature movie length and then some, because there are so many anecdotes, and I'm not shy to tell them. So do hit on me, folks.
Okay, so let me begin by this. Given another opportunity, would you go back?
Yeah. I'm 63 now, and the world has turned, and but a number of my friends ended up wintering several times. It was very, very unusual, however, to winter 2 years immediately in a row. However, a close acquaintance of mine got approval to do that. They usually don't let people do that, actually, because for psychological reasons. But this guy had done well enough that they let him do it. There was a standard joke that went like this. The first time you winter is for the adventure. The second time you winter, it's for the money. Though it's not necessarily that much, but we didn't have to pay federal income taxes. So that helped a little bit because we were out of the country for over a year. The third time you winter, it's because you're nuts. But that's still a joke because it's there were some people who really liked doing it. And I've got friends who did a lot of service up in Greenland in some of the early warning sites and stuff. So certain people enjoy this kind of duty, and I dreamt about it. I have dreamt about it. I've had a recurring dream. I've woken up, or I've had a dream. You know how it is with dreams; it gets weird. But I've on a good number of occasions, I've gotten into a dreamy mindset where I'm actually believing that I have wintered several times and that I'm back there again. And I'm happy to have had that opportunity. But the reality was, for me, it was only once. And if I had had the chance, if I did not have the family obligations that I had when I came home, of course, I might have considered it if they had allowed me to do it. But I'm just very grateful I had the one chance because it was a neat adventure.
Great. And you mentioned all about making friends and connections. Was that all like this? Were there any bitternesses or any other sort of problems?
I think we were very fortunate because I think overall we were perhaps unusually socially harmonious. I credit the gal Janet Phillips, who was the station manager. She had responsibility for selecting most, if not all, of the general support crew. The science teams, like the project I worked for, sent their own people in. But we all got along, but the preponderance of people had been selected by Janet, and I just think she was a lady with a nice laid-back personality of her own and a lot of wisdom, and she selected easygoing people. And some people were more social than others, you know. But there's a question I see about the ratio of men to women. And so as I recall, I think I mentioned, I think there were 7 women to 20 men. And in that distribution, as I recall, there were 2 married couples. Looking at the women, there were, of the women, maybe 2 of them became involved with very close relationships there during the winter. And then at least 2 or 3 of the ladies remained fundamentally single. And again, it was just similar in some respects, similar to how the distribution of people in the way they socialized, how many of them had like steady companions, like to a college dorm. Not everybody is dating in a college dorm. Of course, we had a couple married couples, but something else I can add, which is important. It was generally recognized that before South Pole operations went co-ed, it was much crazier down there. Because when it was all guys, it was more like guys having fun at our fraternity. And even if a good number of the gentlemen were serious young scientists, I mean, I was trying to be a serious young scientist too, but I really enjoyed having laughs with friends, and we enjoyed ourselves. But it was observed that when men were alone with men, they would get just particularly outrageous in some of their silly behavior. When ladies became part of the population, it tended to normalize the general behavior of people. The men were not quite so foolish anymore with the company, the more normal company of women. So that was kind of cool. And I believe that's what people said, and I believe it. So.
Great, thank you. You answered all the pertaining questions as well. Thank you. So here we have a couple of more questions. So now, if we want to go and have a winter over at South Pole, what skills are needed? Where should we apply? How's the job?
This is a good question because, you know, it is an opportunity. There is always a contractor. Sometimes it's Raytheon. Sometimes it's when I was there, the name of the company that was managing operations, including at McMurdo too, it was called Antarctic Support Associates. So some various companies compete to get the contract with National Science Foundation like every 5 years or something. So you've got to find out, so what's the name of the company that's got the contract for Antarctic support right now? Then you apply to them. But the thing is, they need a very wide range of skills, from construction workers, electricians, plumbers, carpenters, to information technicians, communications engineers, science technicians. It's a very broad spectrum. Physicians, of course, of a very broad spectrum of skills, diesel equipment mechanics to keep this place running. But if you want to be involved with the science team, the way to do it is to walk in to a university that's operating an experiment down there. May I tell a brief story? So there was an undergrad, okay, one of our collaborating institutions was Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. And there was a young man who became very prominent in their operation. He began as an undergraduate. He was a physics major or something. He was walking by a laboratory in the basement of a physics building at Carnegie Mellon, and he saw that something interesting was going on inside that laboratory as an undergraduate, and he had the initiative to just walk in through the door and asked him, what are you guys working on in here? That thing looks sort of cool. Well, it turns out they were working on one of the microwave radio telescopes. And he, oh, gee, that's interesting. And they said, yeah, well, this is going to Antarctica. And oh, that's very interesting, said the kid. So then they kind of became a little interested in the kid because they're not stupid. And so they asked him, well, gee, you're interested? Well, tell us a little bit about your background. And what do you know, so you're a physics major? Oh, you grew up on a farm. Gee, do you know something about building stuff? Like, because these guys were in the lab, they're building this thing. On the kid, oh, but then he was very modest. Well, of course, on the farm and the ranch, you know, I did various things. You know, I learned how to weld. That's all they needed to hear. They heard that the kid knew how to weld. And then they said, oh, well, come in a little closer. And on the basis of that was the beginning. And he ended up becoming part of their experimental physics team. And he ended up wintering over, and I don't even remember his name anymore, but I suspect he ended up getting a PhD associated with the project. But it was because he knew how to weld and he mentioned it to them, and that set the stage. So students tend to underestimate how important practical skills are in an experimental physics situation. But the experimentalists recognize these things. So it's important to encourage students with a broad spectrum of talents. So it's just something I enjoy preaching. But oh yeah, there's a couple other questions. How did the facility process dispose of human waste? Oh, okay, now I got to remember, yeah, the Rodriguez well. So there, the waste products went out a tube that went down through a tunnel, dug down away from the dome and with a slight slope to it. And they learned that, oh, I'm trying to remember the details, but they could generate hot water and sort of pump it into a spot under the snow that would melt snow and create like a big spherical enclosure under the snow. And they could do that and actually use that to draw upon, and they call it a Rodriguez well, named after, I guess, the guy who invented the concept. But then they could also use the same kind of concept to segregate another similar melted under snow spot and use it as a receptacle for like septic outflow. And they had another name. There was an individual for whom the septic outflow was named, and he was no longer around, but he must have been somebody surprisingly notorious in the South Pole operations to have the septic outflow named after him. Now, in principle, see, because the snow is such a good insulator, even though it's negative 50 degrees immediately below ground level in the snow, and it's a very constant temperature, snow is such a good insulator that once you create a warm body of water, it could be 50 feet in diameter and like an under snow cavern, it'll stay warm a really long time, especially if you're just pumping a little bit of waste into it. It stays warm and melted. And but eventually such a thing will freeze, and then it can be dug up and it can be flown out. Because another question is, what do they do with trash that accumulates? They fly it out. And in principle, they eventually will dig up waste and ship that out too. But that wasn't going on like when I was there. But they were very careful, like with trash and stuff like that. What kind of machine shop did they have there? A reasonably elaborate one. And that I think was accentuated, it was enhanced as a function of the Kara project, because it was considered very high priority to have the ability to improvise with instrumentation, improvise mechanically by having a reasonably well-equipped machine shop, including even people in the wintertime with some ability to use those tools, and certainly during the brief summertime, like 3 months when the airplanes could come and go, to have one or two full-time machinists. One of my close friends from Yerkes Observatory ended up going to South Pole over a dozen times all summer long as an instrument maker.
And there is another question about the thickness of the ice below the station.
I'm so glad. There are a zillion facts I could have spouted, and I forget to mention them all, of course. But so including a very important factoid, that the geographic altitude at the South Pole Monument when I was there was 9,301 feet. It said so on the sign. And that was almost entirely the thickness of the ice. The snow accumulates, but it turns into ice. The ice is clear, and that's why they have a big experiment down there that was originally named Amanda. Maybe it's called Ice Cube now. I haven't even kept up with it, but they use the clear ice with photomultiplier tubes as a great big particle detector to detect neutrinos. I wasn't involved with that, but some of my friends operated it, and in its early days. But it's not. But the weight of the Antarctic plateau is so heavy that people told me that they believe that it's basically pushed the crust of the Earth down because of the weight of the ice. So the ground level is about at sea level now, or who knows, maybe even a little bit below or something, but it's all ice. However, because it's so cold, when air is cold, its pressure drops, okay? So, PV equals nRT and all that kind of stuff. So the fact is, the colder it got, the pressure went down. So the effective altitude went up during the winter, the physiological altitude. When you land there, well, it's the geographic, like I said, is 9,300, but effectively it was higher because the air was so cold, even in the Antarctic summertime. When it's negative 100 Fahrenheit, the effective altitude, because of the low pressure, was more like 11,000 feet. But by the time it got that cold, we would have physiologically adapted to it quite well. The altitude really didn't bother any of us because we had been there for months, and it's kind of cool how well you acclimate. There were other physiological adaptations having to do with dry air and sinuses and stuff like that that were really weird and interesting. Stuff related to how frequently you have to drink, how frequently you have to pee. There are various interesting human things, but they change. Things settle down after you're there for about a month. Things are a little weird for a month, but you adapt to the extremely dry air that's part of the adventure of being there.
And besides the effects on the human body because of the extreme temperature and humidity and stuff you mentioned, because you're at the geographic North Pole, South Pole, does that have any other effect?
Not that we noticed, I guess. It's not like we were aware of getting irradiated in any interesting way. I noticed no monsters from outer space. Though we made up a lot of jokes and such. Yeah, I guess I'm stumped trying to think of there. I would say though that the psychological effects are a significant field of study in themselves. We are interviewed, a survey. We had to fill out a survey every month. It was part of a research project by a bunch of anthropologists from University of California, Los Angeles. They wanted to learn something about our group dynamics. They were trying to consider, is it possible to engineer a group that will function better together, or do you need to just let a natural, diverse group of people work it out naturally, or is it possible to select certain types of people that will get along because you've engineered them to? I think that's what their goal was. Nobody was trying to engineer us, but they were surveying us and hopefully getting some insight on it, and at least collecting an NSF grant in the process. So, but it's a serious issue. The psychological aspects, it's easy for me to make light of them now, and I could elaborate more if we had more time, but it was certainly part of the adventure, and there are more stories I could tell about what some of the aspects were that made it interesting.
Okay,
and
great.
Maybe I'll just end with this, that when I hear some people talking about, oh yes, well, it's important for humankind for us to colonize Mars and colonize the moon and get people living on Mars. I mean, I like Musk. I think he's cool, right? But isn't he one of the people? May I speak like family talk? We've still got 58 people listening to this. But I tell you, one thing we all felt strongly after winter over at South Pole, as proud as we had been to be there, it's one thing we wanted is to get home. And when people go to Mars someday, there's one thing they're going to want. They're going to want to get there and be there, but then they're going to want to go home. So when people talk about colonizing Mars and making that sort of a semi-permanent thing, I'm thinking that's bullshit, because people are going to want to get home. You want to colonize Mars and make people really live there? Oh boy, that's going to be complicated. Nobody is going to understand that clearly, in my opinion, unless they have considerable insight on what is natural on a deployment at a place like South Pole. It's more complicated than you hear some idealistic people, even powerful idealistic people, speculate about. So that's an interesting point to share with you all. But thank you so very much, Orange County astronomers. I believe I visited the ANZA site. I visualize it because I've looked at a lot of photographs over the years. I grew up as an amateur astronomer. I believe I've been there, but I look forward someday to visiting again, because it's been a long time, like a dream.
Great. Yes, you're certainly welcome to come back and visit. There are a few more questions, if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah.
about health problems that were prevalent.
People have to be serious with not drinking too much. Sometimes people so there's psychological testing as part of the process, becoming part of the crew. I believe that probably the main thing they're looking for is to try to weed out people who have an inkling towards alcoholism. We had wonderful parties at South Pole. The winter over physician had the key to the liquor cabinet, okay? The liquor cabinet was fabulously well stocked. And it turns out that our physician was very easygoing and casual about it. And he announced when that first airplane left, he said, I'm leaving the damn thing unlocked. And if you want to go in and get a bottle of booze, I don't care. And you're supposed to sign out because you're supposed to pay for that. And most of us, I think, had some semblance of honesty, as we guzzled down one thing or another over the course of the year. But in my opinion, we had no problems with alcoholism our year. But I heard about problems like that on some other years. We did have some outrageous parties, of which I am quite proud of at this point, looking back on them. I'm not sure what the question was. I may have digressed. But you were talking about health problems. Well, unfortunately, remember I said that I had a friend who got a PhD, an Australian graduate student on the microthermal experiments. He wintered 2 years or so after I did. He died while he was there. It's a little vague what happened to him, except the speculation is that it was nothing nefarious about it. But the story goes that someone possibly gave him as a gift a bottle of exotic liquor that had come from someplace like Borneo, like on the way in. And it finally came one day, at one time in the middle of the winter, my friend up and drank this bottle of exotic liquor. But apparently, you know how what is it? What's the type of alcohol? Like in glycol, there's a certain kind of alcohol that will kill you. So the speculation was this guy poisoned himself by basically a criminally evil, cheap bottle of liquor that was an innocent gift. So he became suddenly critically ill. They did not know. They struggled to save him, but he died. And this was psychologically very, very devastating to the rest of the crew. I mean, I can't quite imagine. I remember feeling burned out. I remember feeling toasty during our winter. But if one of our dear friends had died, that would have paralyzed most of the base psychologically. This is how they recovered from it. They recovered from it by collectively going into the shop, and it took him a few days to even get on this. He was left out in one of those big archways, frozen in a body bag. They got together, they built a very elaborate coffin as a group. They put him in it, they went out and they dug and they buried him. And having done that, they were able to carry on through the winter. And of course, when the planes returned, they dug up the casket and took him home. But it's just very interesting how they had that activity, a collective activity to deal with the situation, and to some degree put him and themselves somewhat at rest. But he was a friend of mine. He stayed with me at Yerkes Observatory for a while. So there have been other things like that, but that was a particularly personal thing. So, But that was after I was no longer visiting South Pole. So, what kind of animals? Penguins. I saw penguins. I saw Weddell seals, I think, great big seal lions type things. I saw orcas, great big orca whales, like at SeaWorld, but no, they were in Antarctica, flopping around off the coast of McMurdo. And there were great big seagull-like things. They're big and sort of aggressive. Skuas, I think they were called skuas. It's amazing, I forget the details. There was a lot of wildlife at the coastline, and you were at McMurdo Base often long enough to see these things. I did not get to visit some great big penguin rookery or something like that, but there were enough penguins that would just kind of come in, a variety of species that would come in and hang around McMurdo Base, that at least I got reasonably close to enough penguins to feel, penguin-fied. So, but at South Pole, man, no, there was a story that one time somebody saw a skua fly overhead, like it had come homing in, smelling something. Maybe the septic outflow had an encouraging aroma for that skua to fly one hell of a long way in, but woe unto a skua at South Pole Station. Either that or somebody snuck it in on an airplane as a joke. But generally, there's nothing. There's nothing at South Pole.
And also there's a question, you essentially remained very close to the base all time, right? Did you go into any, go into any treks? Any very interesting further part?
Well, we did a couple things, and I shouldn't go on at too great length to describe but it turns out that although the station as I've described it to you no longer exists, it's been torn down because they built a very elaborate new thing. There was an earlier station, earlier than the dome. I think the dome came online about 1970 or something like that. But human beings started wintering over at Pole with the International Geophysical Year or thereabout, something like 58 or 59. And things were very primitive back then. But they dug in, they kind of dug something down under the ice, and they set up some stuff, but the wind-blown snow, it covered it all. And so their whole thing, man, with the passage of time, it became like a big, like ant hive, okay? It was all subterranean, but sub-snow. That place still existed, but it was about a mile. It was another kilometer beyond the base center, even than our astronomy facility, but we all knew where it was. And you were not supposed to go there. It was off limits. No, you're not supposed to, it's dangerous down there. When the first airplane left, after a few days, where do you think most of us went? Immediately to go to Old Pole, because the knowledge was preserved how the hell to get down there. So we went down there, and I have a whole set of slides of what it was like. It's very interesting. Apparently they have since used dynamite or something to really blow it up more so that you could no longer recklessly go down there. But it was very interesting. So that was something of a trek. There was another trek that we took after sunrise. We had a snowmobile. But we also had certain kinds of sleds. We called them banana sleds. But there must have been about 5 or 6 of us with a snowmobile and a banana sled. And after the sun came up, but it was still pretty cold, man, we decided we're going to go out and take a ride with a snowmobile and a banana sled. Because after all, this was at the point, we own the place. South Pole was ours, okay? So we went out in a banana sled. But who of the group was the most stupid? I was. Because you know what? You wear a lot of layers of clothing. But when we decided to go out for that banana sled ride, I didn't even bother to put on my inner layer of pants. Now, you can get away with a lot of things at South Pole Station when you get used to that clothing. and you know, how many layers and all that kind of stuff. But you know what? If you go out for a few miles riding on the back of a banana sled at South Pole shortly after the sun comes up, if you go more than a couple miles on a banana sled, your leg, without all your pairs of pants on, you begin to get cold. And finally, I confided to my friends. I said, so, you know, guys, I'm sorry, but you know what? My legs are cold. And they turned that thing around and we went back. And of course, I was fine. It's not like I got frostbite, but you could get a little casual. You get used to the environment, and you can be a little foolish. And so that was just one example that I can cite. So, but I'm afraid I can go on, and I should release. There's still 52 people listening, so you're very kind in your attention when we're so thoroughly Zoomed nowadays, right?
Yeah, so let's, this is a very interesting thing. Let's ask with the last few questions about clouds and lightning. Do you experience those there?
No lightning or thunder. However, there were, the question reminds me of a curious natural phenomenon that I don't understand, but it was true that below a certain extreme temperature, which according to my memory might have been around negative 85 degrees Fahrenheit, when a human being exhales, just like this, normally you don't hear that much. You just, it's just nothing more than what but below about negative 85 degrees, do you remember how there was the picture of my friend who looked like the dragon with the condensation coming out of the nostrils, like afterburners on a jet plane or something? But it would, a human exhalation, there would be a noise that would come out of the cloud of condensation, sort of a deep, a gentle, new, curious, soft, low noise that had something to do with turbulence, I presume, inside the condensation cloud, particularly because something was condensing or freezing unusually fast below about 85 Fahrenheit. And I asked my friends about it, and nobody disagreed with it, but I never heard anybody else sort of document it or explain it. But it probably would be there was some interesting physical explanation that probably had to do with an interesting low frequency, but audio frequency turbulence having to do with the condensation that only occurred at negative 85. Or something like that. But in terms of electrostatic stuff, anything like that kind of meteorological activity, no. The wind never blew when I was there more than about 35 knots. What caused the warm temperatures? Remember the extreme temperature variations? Wind. When it was windy out, the temperature went up, because when there was wind, it meant air was blowing in off the ocean. What made it below negative 100 Fahrenheit? That was when it was still, because then there would be still and clear, because then there would be extreme radiational cooling, and the ice right at your feet would get incredibly cold, and below negative 100. But you'd only have to go up to the top of that meteorology tower, and the temperature would be 20 or 30 degrees warmer, only 70 feet up. Therefore, with such an extreme temperature gradient, the air turbulence was really quite severe there. That is why near-infrared astronomy is not taken off at South Pole Station, because the seeing is terrible. We'd have to put telescopes up on tall towers, like the solar towers at Mount Wilson. If they did that, the seeing on Antarctica would probably be spectacular, like mind-blowingly good. But near the ice level, you're looking through too much of a turbulent thermal gradient. So, but the microwave stuff is paid off. And of course, there's a gargantuan South Pole microwave telescope operating down there now.
And can you remind us how far were you from the ocean? Oh, you mentioned something about 7 hours of flight.
Well, the 7.5 hours was between Christchurch, New Zealand, and McMurdo on the coastline, and then it was a 3.5 hour flight for McMurdo to Pole. And unfortunately, I've forgotten when you look at what the distances are. So we just have to get out a map. Interestingly, when you look at a map, South Pole Station is not really well centered on the Antarctic continent. There are higher and more extreme locations on the Antarctic plateau. The Soviet and Russian station called Vostok Station is not at pole, but it's at higher altitude and it's more extreme. And the European station that has been more recently built, called Concordia Base, is also at a much higher altitude and more extreme place. So to winter over with the Europeans at Concordia Station, that would be the adventure today.
And you also mentioned about the ozone hole. Was there anything noticeable there about the ozone layer's hole?
It was too far removed for my specialty, for me to be wise enough to learn much about it, except I made friends with the people making the measurements, and just the mode of the measurements alone was fascinating to me. And I gather that other people listening, I bet, will know much more than I, but I gather the ozone hole has perhaps become less of a mysterious concern than it was back then. I think I have heard in the media that the hole has come and gone, and maybe it's becoming recognized that there are natural cycles there. But I'm blowing smoke talking about the ozone hole. we'd have to Google it to pretend to ourselves that we know what we're talking about.
Okay, great. John, again, thank you very much for a fascinating talk and an interesting adventure that you've had. That covers all the questions. So if you do not have any final remarks, we're about to end our meeting. I would like to thank everybody for attending and staying this long. Please check the calendar on our website for all the upcoming events at ocastronomers.org. Thank you for joining us, and we wish you great times ahead.
Thanks, everybody,
Bye.
for bearing with me, folks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.